The first time Cassidy Lawson laid eyes on Sheriff Samuel Kane's hat, she knew she had to have it not because she needed a hat, but because she wanted him to chase her. It was 1875 in the dusty town of Cottonwood Springs, and Cassidy had just turned 19, wild as the untamed horses that roamed the Arizona Territory. The sheriff's office stood at the end of Main Street, a weathered wooden building that had seen its fair share of troublemakers. Samuel Kane had been sheriff for 3 years now, having taken the badge at 25 after the previous lawman caught a bullet during a bank robbery. At 28, he was already respected throughout the county, known for his steady hand and unwavering sense of justice. Cassidy paused outside the sheriff's office, her heart hammering against her ribs. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the street, and she could see Sheriff Kane through the window, bent over his desk, his prized Stetson resting beside him. It was a fine hat tan with a chocolate-brown band, shaped by years of wear and the elements. The sheriff was known to be particular about that hat, never letting anyone touch it. "Miss Lawson," Mrs. Peterson called from the general store porch, "your father's looking for you. Says you're needed back at the ranch." Cassidy smiled and waved, but had no intention of heading home yet. Her father, Edmund Lawson, owned one of the largest cattle ranches outside of town. He was a fair man but had grown increasingly protective since her mother died 3 years ago. Cassidy knew he'd be annoyed when she returned late, but some opportunities were worth the risk. She slipped into the sheriff's office without knocking. Samuel looked up from his paperwork, surprise flickering across his face. "Miss Lawson, what brings you to my office today?" His voice was deep, measured, the kind that commanded attention without raising in volume. "Sheriff Kane," she said, stepping closer to his desk. "I was wondering if you'd heard anything about those cattle rustlers my father mentioned." Samuel leaned back in his chair, watching her with careful blue eyes. "Nothing new to report. I told your father I'd ride out to check the north pasture tomorrow. That's good of you." Cassidy moved to the side of his desk, running her fingers along the edge. "Pa worries too much these days." "He has reason to," Samuel said. "Tough times bring desperate men." Cassidy nodded, edging closer to where his hat lay. "Will you be needing any help? I know those trails better than most." Samuel smiled just slightly. "I appreciate the offer, but I don't think your father would approve of you chasing after rustlers." "My father doesn't approve of most things I do," she said with a laugh. In one swift movement, while Samuel was distracted by her smile, Cassidy snatched his hat from the desk and darted toward the door. "Miss Lawson." The sheriff was on his feet instantly, but Cassidy was already out the door, his prized Stetson clutched in her hands. She ran down the boardwalk, weaving between townspeople, her laughter carrying on the warm afternoon air. She could hear the sheriff's boots pounding the wooden planks behind her, gaining with each stride. "Cassidy Lawson, you bring that hat back right now." His voice held equal parts authority and disbelief. She ducked down an alley between the saloon and the blacksmith shop, her heart racing with exhilaration. When she emerged on the other side, she collided with a solid chest. Strong hands gripped her shoulders to steady her, and she looked up into Sheriff Kane's stern face. "How did you? I know this town better than you think," he said, breathing hard from the chase. His eyes were fixed on his hat, still clutched in her hands. Cassidy wasn't ready to surrender. She stepped back, holding the hat behind her. "If you want it, Sheriff, you'll have to catch me properly." Something in his expression shifted, a flicker of amusement breaking through his official demeanor. "Miss Lawson, I'm the sheriff. I don't have time for games." "Just one game," she said, backing away slowly. "Surely the law can spare a few minutes." Without warning, she turned and ran again, this time toward the town's small park where children played during the day. It was nearly empty now as supper time approached, just a few older boys shooting marbles under the cottonwood tree. Samuel followed at a measured pace, no longer running but not letting her out of his sight either. Cassidy circled the tree, putting it between them, playfully peeking around the trunk. "Is this how you entertain yourself, Miss Lawson, stealing from officers of the law?" Despite his words, there was a hint of a smile tugging at his lips. "Only from officers who need to smile more," she countered, stepping back as he approached. Samuel circled left and she circled right, keeping the tree between them. I smile when there's cause, he said. Then I'm giving you cause. She darted right, then quickly reversed direction, but Samuel anticipated her move. His arm shot out, catching her around the waist. Gotcha, he said softly, his face suddenly very close to hers. Cassidy's breath caught in her throat. She'd been teasing him for months, finding excuses to visit town whenever she knew he'd be around, but she'd never been this close to him before. Close enough to see the faint scar above his right eyebrow, to notice the flecks of gray in his otherwise blue eyes. Slowly, deliberately, Samuel took his hat from her unresisting fingers, but instead of putting it on his own head, he gently placed it on hers. It was too large, slipping down until it nearly covered her eyes. There, he said, his voice low. It suits you. She pushed the brim up with one finger so she could see his face. Does this mean it's mine now? Samuel's expression softened, and the smile she'd been trying to provoke finally appeared. No, Miss Lawson, but it does mean you're mine. The boldness of his statement hung in the air between them, surprising them both. Cassidy felt her cheeks flush, but she didn't look away. That's mighty presumptuous, Sheriff Kane, she said, though her voice lacked conviction. He reached out and adjusted the hat on her head, his fingers lingering longer than necessary. Maybe so, but I don't see you running away anymore. The truth of his words settled over her. She wasn't running. For the first time in her life, Cassidy Lawson had found someone she wanted to run toward. My father's expecting me home, she said finally, reluctantly. I should go. Samuel nodded, taking his hat back and settling it on his own head. I'll ride with you. It's getting late and those rustlers are still out there. I can take care of myself, she protested, but without much conviction. I know you can, he said, but I'd like to speak with your father anyway, about the rustlers. They walked together to the livery where Cassidy's horse was stabled. The stable boy, Jimmy, had already saddled her mare in anticipation of her departure. Will you be needing your horse too, Sheriff? Jimmy asked, eyeing them curiously. Yes, Jimmy. I'm escorting Miss Lawson back to the Lawson Ranch. As they rode side by side out of town, Cassidy couldn't help stealing glances at the man beside her. She'd accomplished what she'd set out to do, gotten his attention, made him smile, but now she felt nervous in a way she hadn't expected. Why'd you really take my hat? Samuel asked after they'd ridden in silence for a while. Cassidy considered making up a story, but something about the direct way he looked at her made her want to be honest. To make you chase me, he chuckled, shaking his head. There are simpler ways to get a man's attention, Miss Lawson. Are there? None that seem to be working on you. His eyebrows rose. You've been trying to get my attention. For months, she admitted, looking ahead at the trail. You're either the most oblivious man in the territory or the most stubborn. Maybe a bit of both, he said, but I noticed. I just didn't think it proper to encourage you. Cassidy turned to look at him. And now, Samuel adjusted his hat, the same hat she'd stolen less than an hour ago. Now I'm riding you home to speak with your father about rustlers. Just rustlers, she pressed. His eyes met hers, serious and steady. For now, but I aim to return tomorrow and not just to check the north pasture. Cassidy felt warmth spread through her chest. I'll be waiting, Sheriff Kane. As they approached the Lawson Ranch, the sun was setting behind the mountains, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks. The main house stood on a small rise, with the bunkhouse and barn nestled below. Several ranch hands were moving about, finishing their evening chores. Cassidy's father stood on the porch, his expression shifting from concern to curiosity when he spotted his daughter riding in with the sheriff. Evening, Sheriff, Edmund called as they dismounted. Wasn't expecting to see you until tomorrow. Mr. Lawson, Samuel greeted with a nod. I ran into your daughter in town and thought it best to escort her home, given the concerns about rustlers. Edmund's gaze shifted to his daughter. That was thoughtful of you, Sheriff. Cassidy sometimes forgets the dangers that might be lurking. I don't forget, Cassidy protested. I just don't fear them the way you do, Pa. Edmund sighed, a familiar sound of exasperation. Come on in, both of you. Rose is just about to serve supper and there's plenty. Samuel hesitated, glancing at Cassidy before addressing her father. I wouldn't want to impose. Nonsense, Edmund said. We can discuss the rustler situation over a hot meal, and I'm sure whatever trouble my daughter caused you deserves at least a steak dinner in compensation." Cassidy felt her face grow hot. "Pa," Edmund laughed. "I know that innocent look of yours all too well, Cassidy. Come on in, Sheriff. My daughter may be a handful, but Rosa's cooking is worth the aggravation." As they entered the ranch house, Cassidy wondered what her father would say if he knew she'd stolen the sheriff's hat, or that the sheriff had placed it on her head and called her his. The thought made her smile secretly as she watched Samuel hang his hat carefully on the rack by the door. Samuel had never been inside the Lawson home before, though he'd visited the ranch on official business several times. The main room was comfortable and well-appointed, with a stone fireplace along one wall and a large oak dining table at the center. Photos in wooden frames lined the mantel, most featuring a younger Cassidy and a woman who must have been her mother. Rosa, the Lawsons' housekeeper since before Cassidy was born, appeared from the kitchen. "Dinner is ready, Mr. Lawson. Oh, Sheriff Kane, what a pleasant surprise." "Sheriff Kane will be joining us," Edmund said. "Set another place, please." "Of course, right away," Rosa said, disappearing back into the kitchen. Edmund gestured toward the sitting area. "Make yourself comfortable, Sheriff. Can I offer you a drink?" "Just water, thank you," Samuel replied, taking a seat in one of the leather armchairs. "I'm still on duty, technically." Cassidy sat on the sofa opposite him, smoothing her skirt. She hadn't expected him to accept the dinner invitation, and now found herself unsure how to act in his presence with her father watching. Edmund poured 2 glasses of whiskey and a glass of water, handing the water to Samuel. "So, any news on those rustlers? Johnson over at the Circle J lost another dozen head last night." Samuel nodded gravely. "That's why I was planning to ride out tomorrow. I've got reports of similar thefts across 3 counties. Seems to be an organized outfit. Any ideas who might be behind it?" Edmund asked, taking a seat next to his daughter. "I have my suspicions. There's a new outfit set up north of here, led by a man named Harlan Reed. He showed up about 6 months ago, right when the rustling started." "Reed," Edmund repeated. "Can't say I know the name." "He's not from around here," Samuel said. "Word is he came up from Texas after some trouble with the law there." Cassidy leaned forward. "What kind of trouble?" Samuel's eyes flicked to her. "The kind that ends with men in graves, Miss Lawson." Edmund frowned. "I don't like the sound of that. Especially with you riding out alone tomorrow. It's my job, Mr. Lawson." "Still, might be wise to take a few men with you," Edmund suggested. "I could spare Miller and Dawson." Before Samuel could respond, Rosa announced that dinner was served. They moved to the dining table, where steaming plates of beef, potatoes, and green beans awaited them. Throughout the meal, Cassidy noticed how Samuel seamlessly conversed with her father about ranch matters, cattle prices, and local politics. He was respectful but confident, knowledgeable about the issues facing ranchers in the territory. Occasionally, his eyes would meet hers across the table, and the corner of his mouth would lift slightly before he returned his attention to her father. As Rosa cleared the plates and brought out apple pie for dessert, Edmund turned the conversation back to the rustlers. "I think you should consider the sheriff's offer, Cassidy." Cassidy blinked in confusion. "What offer?" "To ride with him tomorrow to check the north pasture," Edmund said. "You know that area better than anyone, and if the sheriff's going to be tracking rustlers, he could use a guide who knows every creek and ravine." Cassidy looked at Samuel, who appeared equally surprised. "I don't recall making that offer, sir." Edmund waved his hand dismissively. "Well, I'm making it for you. My daughter's as good a rider as any man on this ranch, and she knows that territory like the back of her hand. She can show you places those rustlers might be using that aren't on any map." Samuel considered this, his eyes meeting Cassidy's again. "If Miss Lawson is willing, I'd welcome the assistance." Cassidy couldn't believe her father was actually encouraging her to spend time with the sheriff alone, no less. "I'd be happy to help, Sheriff Kane." "Good, that's settled then," Edmund said, seemingly satisfied. "You can leave after breakfast. Rosa will pack you both some food." After dessert, Edmund excused himself to check on a mare that was close to foaling, leaving Cassidy alone with Samuel in the sitting room. "Your father surprises me," Samuel said once they were alone. "I expected him to be more." Protective, Cassidy smiled. He trusts you, Sheriff, and he knows I can handle myself. Samuel, he said. If we're going to be riding together tomorrow, you might as well call me Samuel. Samuel, she repeated, testing the name on her tongue. Then you should call me Cassidy. He nodded, his eyes never leaving hers. Cassidy. The way he said her name sent a small shiver down her spine. She stood and moved to the fireplace, needing some distance to collect her thoughts. Why did you say it? She asked after a moment. Say what? She turned to face him. In the park, when you put your hat on my head, you said it meant I was yours. Samuel stood and crossed to where she stood, close enough that she had to tilt her head back to maintain eye contact. Because from the moment you ran out of my office with my hat, I knew I didn't want to let you go. You barely know me, she whispered. I know enough, he said. I know you're brave and spirited. I know you love this land and your father. I know you've been coming to town more often than necessary, finding reasons to pass by my office. Cassidy felt her cheeks flush. You noticed that? I notice everything about you, Cassidy Lawson. His voice was low, intimate. I have since the first day you rode into town after I became sheriff. You were arguing with the shopkeeper about the price of leather gloves. She remembered that day. She'd been stubborn, refusing to pay what she considered an unfair price. You sided with him, Samuel smiled, because he was right, but I admired your spirit. The sound of boots on the porch steps alerted them to Edmund's return. Samuel stepped back just as the door opened. Mare's doing fine, Edmund announced. Probably another day or two. He looked between them, noticing the tension. Sheriff, it's getting late. You're welcome to stay in our guest room if you'd like to avoid the ride back to town in the dark. Thank you for the offer, Mr. Lawson, but I should get back. I have rounds to make in the morning before I return here. Edmund nodded. As you wish. Cassidy can see you out while I have a word with Rosa about tomorrow's supplies. As Edmund disappeared into the kitchen, Samuel retrieved his hat from the rack by the door. Cassidy followed him onto the porch, closing the door behind them for privacy. I'll be back around noon, Samuel said, settling his hat on his head. I'll be ready, she promised. Then, feeling bold, she added, you know, if you really want to catch rustlers, we should check Whispering Canyon. It's not on any maps, but it's perfect for hiding stolen cattle, has water, grass, and only one way in or out. Samuel raised an eyebrow. Sounds like valuable information. Why tell me now instead of tomorrow? Cassidy stepped closer. Because tomorrow we'll have other things to discuss. Like what? Like what you meant when you called me yours. Her heart was pounding, but she held his gaze. Samuel's expression softened. He reached out, his fingers gently brushing a strand of hair from her face. I meant that I've been watching you for a long time, Cassidy Lawson. And today, when you took my hat, it gave me the excuse I've been waiting for. An excuse for what? Instead of answering, he leaned down and pressed his lips to hers, a brief, gentle kiss that left her wanting more. When he pulled back, his eyes were dark with an emotion that made her breath catch. I'll see you tomorrow, he said, his voice husky. Noon, Cassidy nodded, not trusting herself to speak. She watched as he mounted his horse and rode away, his silhouette gradually fading into the gathering darkness. Only when he was completely out of sight did she touch her fingers to her lips, still feeling the warmth of his kiss. Inside, her father was waiting in the sitting room, a knowing look on his face. Sheriff seems like a good man, he said casually. Cassidy sat across from him, trying to appear nonchalant. He is. Known him since he first came to these parts 5 years ago now. Worked as a deputy before taking the badge. Edmund sipped his whiskey. He comes from good stock. His father was a judge back east. Cassidy realized her father was telling her things about Samuel she didn't know. Why are you telling me this, Pa? Edmund set his glass down. Because I see the way you look at him, and the way he looks at you. And you're not opposed, she asked carefully. Would it matter if I was? When she didn't answer, he continued, I want you to be happy, Cassidy. Your mother would want that too. Sheriff Kane is a man of principle, and I believe he'd treat you right. Cassidy was touched by her father's understanding. Thank you, Pa. Edmund stood, stretching his back. Just don't go rushing into anything. Get to know the man properly. And remember, a good hat is hard to find if he values his as much as I value mine. You've already made quite an impression. Cassidy laughed. How did you know about the hat? Jimmy at the livery has a loose tongue, Edmund said with a wink. Get some rest, you've got an early start tomorrow. That night, Cassidy found it hard to sleep. Her thoughts kept returning to Samuel, the feel of his lips on hers, the intensity in his eyes when he looked at her, the unexpected boldness of his declaration in the park. She'd been drawn to him for months, but today had changed everything. Tomorrow couldn't come soon enough. Morning arrived with clear skies and a gentle breeze, perfect weather for riding. Cassidy was up before dawn, eager for the day ahead. She chose her clothes carefully, practical for riding but still flattering. A blue cotton shirt that matched her eyes, her best riding skirt, and sturdy boots. She braided her long blonde hair into a single plait that hung down her back. After breakfast, she helped Rosa pack food for their journey: cold fried chicken, biscuits, apples, and a jug of water. By 11, she was too restless to stay in the house and went to the stable to prepare her horse, a spirited chestnut mare named Penny. "Going somewhere special?" Miller, one of the ranch hands, asked as he watched her meticulously brushing Penny's coat. "Riding with Sheriff Kane to check for rustlers," she said, trying to sound casual. Miller grinned. "Is that what they're calling it these days?" Cassidy flicked the brush at him. "Mind your business, Miller." "Yes, madam," he said with a mock salute. "But if you're really looking for rustlers, you might want to take a rifle. Your pa would skin me alive if I let you ride out there with just that little pistol of yours." He had a point. Cassidy retrieved her Winchester from the gun cabinet in the house, along with extra ammunition. She was an excellent shot. Her father had insisted she learn to protect herself after her mother died. Just before noon, she spotted a rider approaching. Samuel sat tall in the saddle, his badge catching the sunlight. He'd replaced his everyday tan Stetson with a darker, more practical hat for the trail. Cassidy's heart quickened at the sight of him. "Right on time, Sheriff," she called as he reached the yard. Samuel dismounted, leading his horse to the water trough. "Miss Lawson, you look ready for a hunt." "I am." She patted the rifle in its scabbard attached to her saddle, "and I know exactly where to start." Edmund emerged from the house carrying an extra canteen. "Sheriff, good to see you." He handed the canteen to Cassidy, "just in case. That canyon she's likely taking you to doesn't have as much water this time of year." Samuel shook Edmund's hand. "We'll be careful, sir, and if we find any sign of the rustlers, we'll observe only. I won't put your daughter in danger." "See that you don't," Edmund said, though his tone was friendly. "I expect you both back by nightfall. If you're going to be later, send word." "Yes, sir," Samuel agreed. They mounted up and rode out, Cassidy leading the way. Once they were beyond the ranch boundaries, she urged Penny into a gallop across the open plain, the wind whipping at her face. Samuel kept pace beside her, and for a while they simply enjoyed the freedom of the ride. Eventually, Cassidy slowed to a trot as they approached more rugged terrain. "Whispering Canyon is about 2 hours from here," she explained. "The entrance is hidden. You'd ride right past it if you didn't know what to look for." "How did you find it?" Samuel asked. "I was 12, riding with my mother. We were chasing a stray calf and followed it through a narrow gap in the rocks. Inside was this beautiful canyon with a small stream and plenty of grass. My mother said it would be our secret place." Her voice softened at the memory. "And now you're sharing it with me," Samuel observed. Cassidy glanced at him. "If rustlers have found it, it's not much of a secret anymore. Besides, I trust you." They rode in comfortable silence for a time, the landscape gradually changing from open grassland to rocky, scrubby terrain. The sun climbed higher and the heat intensified. Occasionally, Cassidy would point out landmarks or share stories about growing up on the ranch. "What about you?" she asked as they stopped to rest the horses in the shade of an overhanging rock. "Your father was a judge. How did you end up a sheriff in Arizona territory?" Samuel took a drink from his canteen before answering. "My father wanted me to follow in his footsteps, go to law school, become a lawyer, eventually a judge. I tried, spent 2 years at a university back east." "What happened?" "I hated every minute of it," he said with a rueful smile. "All those dusty books and stuffy professors. I wanted to be out in the world making a difference directly. We had some terrible arguments, my father and I. Eventually, I left. Came west, worked odd jobs until I landed a position as a deputy in Tucson." "Do you ever regret it?" Cassidy asked. "Leaving, I mean." Samuel shook his head. No, my father and I reconciled before he died. He came to visit me when I was a deputy, saw that I was doing good work. He didn't say it in so many words, but I think he was proud. Cassidy studied his face as he spoke, noticing the quiet strength there. I think he would be proud of who you are now. Their eyes met, and for a moment, Cassidy thought he might kiss her again. Instead, he stood and offered his hand to help her up. We should keep moving if we want to reach the canyon with enough daylight left to investigate properly. The trail grew increasingly difficult as they ventured into terrain few people ever traversed. Narrow paths wound between rocky outcroppings, occasionally opening onto breathtaking vistas of the surrounding countryside. Cassidy rode with confidence, clearly familiar with every twist and turn. Just ahead, she said finally, pointing to what appeared to be a solid rock face. The entrance is there, though you can't see it until you're right on top of it. As they drew closer, Samuel saw what she meant. A narrow gap, no more than 6 feet wide, cut through the rock wall. From more than a few yards away, the shadows made it nearly invisible. Clever hiding place, he remarked. If there are rustlers using this canyon, they picked well. Cassidy dismounted, leading Penny toward the gap. We should go in on foot first, just to be safe. The entrance creates an echo horse's hooves would announce our arrival. Samuel followed her lead, tying his horse beside hers in a small cluster of scrub oak that provided some shade. He checked his revolver, making sure it was fully loaded, then took his rifle from its scabbard. Stay behind me, he instructed, his tone leaving no room for argument. For once, Cassidy didn't protest. She retrieved her own rifle but let Samuel take the lead as they approached the narrow entrance. The gap was cool and dark, the high walls blocking the sun. Their boots made little sound on the sandy ground as they moved carefully forward. After about 30 yards, the passage widened suddenly, opening into a canyon that took Samuel's breath away. The space was perhaps half a mile long and a quarter mile across, surrounded by sheer rock walls that rose hundreds of feet. A small stream meandered through the center, bordered by lush grass and scattered cottonwood trees. It was, as Cassidy had described, perfect for hiding cattle or anything else someone wanted to keep secret. It's beautiful, Samuel whispered, understanding why Cassidy and her mother had kept it to themselves. Cassidy nodded, but her attention was focused on the far end of the canyon. Look there, she said quietly, pointing. Those aren't wild horses. Samuel followed her gaze and saw what she'd spotted, a remuda of perhaps 15 horses corralled with ropes strung between trees. Near them, he could make out what appeared to be a camp, with several small tents and a fire pit. And those aren't Lawson cattle, he added, noting a small herd of cattle grazing nearby. Each bore a brand he recognized from neighboring ranches, some from the Circle J, others from the Double R. How many men do you think? Cassidy asked, her voice barely audible. Samuel studied the camp. Based on the number of horses and size of the camp, I'd guess 6 to 8. Too many for us to handle, especially if they're Reed's men. What do? We observe, gather information, then head back to get more men, Samuel said. I want to see if Reed himself is down there. They found a sheltered position behind a large boulder that offered a good view of the camp while keeping them hidden. Using Samuel's field glass, they took turns studying the rustlers' operation. That's Reed, Samuel said, pointing to a tall man with a distinctive red beard who seemed to be giving orders to the others. I've seen him in town a few times, always surrounded by hired guns. As they watched, they counted 7 men total. The rustlers appeared to be preparing to move the cattle, perhaps that night. They'll probably head north, Cassidy reasoned. There's a trail out the back of the canyon that connects to the old military road. From there, they could drive the cattle all the way to Colorado without passing through any towns. Samuel gave her an impressed look. You really do know this territory. Told you I'd be useful, she said with a small smile. They continued observing for nearly an hour, noting the rustlers' routines and the layout of their camp. The men appeared well armed but relaxed, clearly not expecting trouble in their secret hideout. We've seen enough, Samuel finally said. We should head back while we have plenty of daylight. I'll gather a posse and return tonight. If they're planning to move those cattle, we need to catch them in the act. They retreated carefully the way they had come, speaking only once they had reached their horses and mounted up. "You were right about the canyon," Samuel told her as they rode away from the hidden entrance. "Perfect hiding place. Without your knowledge, we might never have found them." Cassidy felt a rush of pride at his praise. "What's your plan now?" "Get you safely back to your ranch, then ride to town to gather men. I'll need at least 10, maybe 12 to handle that bunch. Reed has a reputation for violence." "I could help," Cassidy offered. "I'm a good shot." Samuel's expression grew serious. "Absolutely not. I already involved you more than I should have. Your father would have my badge and possibly my head if I let you join a posse going after armed rustlers." Cassidy opened her mouth to argue but thought better of it. "Fine, but you have to promise to tell me everything that happens." "Deal," he agreed. They rode hard on the return journey, taking a more direct route now that stealth wasn't necessary. The sun was beginning its descent toward the western mountains, casting long shadows across the landscape. Despite the urgency of their mission, Cassidy found herself wishing the ride could last longer. Tomorrow, after the rustlers were captured, would Samuel still look at her the way he had last night? Or would he retreat behind his badge again? "What are you thinking about?" Samuel asked, noticing her pensive expression. "Just wondering what happens after all this is over," she admitted. Samuel guided his horse closer to hers. "After the rustlers are dealt with, you mean?" She nodded. "Well, I reckon I'll have a talk with your father," he said. A proper talk about his daughter. Cassidy's heart skipped a beat. "What kind of talk?" Samuel's eyes met hers, warm and steady. "The kind where a man asks permission to court a young lady he's grown rather fond of. And if he says yes," she asked, trying to keep her voice even, "then I'd hope the young lady might be amenable to spending more time with me, perhaps even wearing my hat again occasionally." A smile spread across Cassidy's face. "I think she might be very amenable to that, Sheriff Kane." They crested a rise that offered a view of the Lawson ranch in the distance. The sight should have been comforting, but something was wrong. Even from this distance, they could see unusual activity, men on horseback moving rapidly around the property, what looked like smoke rising from one of the outbuildings. "Something's happening," Cassidy said, alarm rising in her voice. Samuel urged his horse forward. "Stay close to me." They galloped toward the ranch, covering the remaining distance in minutes. As they drew closer, the scene became clearer and more frightening. The bunkhouse was on fire, ranch hands working desperately to extinguish the flames. Several men lay on the ground, being tended to by others. And on the porch of the main house stood Edmund Lawson, his arm being bandaged by Rosa. "Pa," Cassidy cried, dismounting before her horse had fully stopped. She ran to the porch, fear clutching at her heart. "What happened? Are you all right?" Edmund looked up, relief washing over his face at the sight of his daughter. "Cassidy, thank God. I was worried they might have run into you two on the trail." "Who, Pa? What happened?" She examined the bloody bandage on his arm. "Reed and his men," Edmund said grimly. "At least a dozen of them rode in about an hour ago, looking for cattle to steal. When we resisted, they opened fire, burned the bunkhouse to send a message." Samuel had joined them on the porch, his expression dark with anger. "Anyone killed?" "No, thank the Lord," Edmund replied. "Jenkins and Miller took bullets, but Doc says they'll recover. The rest are just cuts and bruises. They took 50 head of my best breeding stock." "Which way did they go?" Samuel asked. Edmund pointed east, toward the high country. "Said something about joining up with the rest of their outfit before heading north." Samuel and Cassidy exchanged a look. "The canyon," they said simultaneously. "What canyon?" Edmund asked. Quickly, they explained what they'd discovered during their ride, the hidden canyon, the stolen cattle, and Reed's operation. "They must have split their forces," Samuel reasoned. "The men we saw in the canyon were preparing to move the cattle they'd already stolen. Reed and another group came here for more before joining them." "How many men total do you think they have?" Edmund asked. "Based on what we saw and what hit here, probably 15, maybe more," Samuel estimated. "Too many to take on without a proper posse." Edmund struggled to his feet, wincing at the pain in his arm. "My men and I will ride with you, Sheriff. Those are our cattle they stole." "You're injured, Mr. Lawson," Samuel protested, "and your men have been through enough today." "We've got 6 men still able to ride," Edmund insisted. Add that to whatever men you can gather in town and we've got a fighting chance. Samuel considered this, then nodded reluctantly. All right, but we do this by the book. I'm still the law here. Understood, Edmund agreed. When do we ride? As soon as possible. If they're planning to move all that cattle tonight, we need to catch them before they get too far into the mountains. Samuel turned to Cassidy. I need you to stay here with Rosa and the injured men. Cassidy's eyes flashed. They attacked our ranch, hurt our people, stole our cattle. I'm coming with you. Cassidy, both men began simultaneously. No, she cut them off. I know that canyon better than anyone. You need me to guide you in the dark. Samuel and Edmund exchanged a look, a silent communication passing between them. She's right about knowing the canyon, Edmund finally said. And she's as good with a rifle as any of my men. Samuel didn't look happy, but he nodded. Fine, but you stay with the group, follow orders, and if there's trouble, you find cover immediately. Understood. Understood, Cassidy agreed, relief flooding through her. She hadn't been sure her father would back her up. I'll ride to town now, Samuel said. Round up whatever men I can find. We'll meet back here in 2 hours. I'll have the men ready, Edmund promised. As Samuel prepared to leave, Cassidy followed him to his horse. Be careful in town if Reed has men there. I know, he said. I'll be discreet. He checked his saddle, then turned to face her. I meant what I said earlier, Cassidy, about talking to your father. I know you did, she said softly. All the more reason for us both to come through this safely. Samuel looked around quickly to ensure no one was watching, then leaned down and kissed her a brief but fervent promise. 2 hours, he said, then mounted his horse and rode away. The next 2 hours were a flurry of activity at the Lawson Ranch. The 6 able-bodied ranch hands prepared horses, checked weapons, and packed supplies. Cassidy changed into more practical clothing for night riding and potential fighting canvas trousers usually worn by the ranch hands, a dark shirt, and a bandana to keep her braided hair contained. Her father raised an eyebrow at her attire, but said nothing. Rosa prepared food for the men and expressed her concern the only way she knew how, by making sure everyone ate. You cannot fight outlaws on empty stomachs, she insisted, pressing sandwiches and canteens into hands. As dusk approached, Samuel returned with 8 men from town shopkeepers, farmers, and a few experienced hunters. They weren't professional lawmen, but they were determined citizens who had grown tired of the rustlers' depredations. Reed's men were in the saloon earlier, Samuel reported to Edmund as they gathered in the ranch yard. Drinking and boasting about how they'd taught the big ranchers a lesson. They left about an hour ago, heading east, toward the canyon, Edmund confirmed. Samuel addressed the assembled group. Listen up. We're facing experienced and violent men, well-armed and unlikely to surrender without a fight. Our goal is to recover the stolen cattle and apprehend the rustlers, but I won't risk any of your lives unnecessarily. We'll approach the canyon quietly, assess their numbers and position, and plan our move accordingly. He outlined his strategy. They would split into 2 groups, one led by himself and one by Edmund, approaching the canyon from different directions. Cassidy would guide Samuel's group to the hidden entrance, while one of the ranch hands who knew the back trail would lead Edmund's group to the rear exit of the canyon. If we time it right, Samuel concluded, we can trap them inside the canyon with no escape route. As the men mounted up, Samuel pulled Cassidy aside. Stay close to me. If shooting starts, find cover immediately. I can handle myself, she reminded him. I know you can, he said, but I can't focus on stopping Reed if I'm worried about you. The simple admission of his concern touched her. I'll be careful, she promised. They rode out as darkness fell, a determined company of 15 moving silently across the moonlit landscape. The night was clear, stars scattered like diamond dust across the sky. Under different circumstances, it might have been a beautiful evening for a ride. Cassidy led Samuel's group, consisting of himself and 6 townsmen, toward the hidden entrance of the canyon. They traveled without lanterns, relying on moonlight and Cassidy's intimate knowledge of the terrain. Edmund's group, with the remaining ranch hands and townsmen, took a longer route that would bring them to the back exit of the canyon. When they were about a mile from the entrance, Samuel signaled for the group to halt. We'll approach on foot from here, he whispered. less chance of being heard. They dismounted, securing their horses to scattered trees. Each man checked his weapon one final time before following Cassidy and Samuel toward the canyon entrance. As they drew closer, they could see the glow of campfires within the canyon and hear the occasional lowing of cattle. Samuel used hand signals to position his men around the entrance, then motioned for Cassidy to join him behind a large boulder. "We need to wait for your father's group to get into position at the other end," he whispered. "Probably another 30 minutes, Cassidy nodded, settling in beside him. The night air had grown cooler, and she found herself grateful for his warmth as they huddled together, watching the canyon entrance. "Reed's dangerous," Samuel said softly after a while. "If he's cornered, there's no telling what he might do." "You've dealt with dangerous men before," Cassidy pointed out. "Yes, but not with someone I care about standing next to me." His hand found hers in the darkness, squeezing gently. The simple gesture conveyed more than words could have. Cassidy leaned against him slightly, drawing strength from his presence. "When this is over," she whispered, "I want my hat back." Samuel chuckled quietly. "Your hat. The one you put on my head, the one that means I'm yours." Even in the dim light, she could see his expression soften. "Deal," he said, his voice rough with emotion. The minutes ticked by slowly as they waited for Edmund's group to reach position. Occasionally, they could hear voices from inside the canyon, men laughing, arguing, preparing for their journey north with the stolen cattle. Finally, the agreed-upon time arrived. Samuel checked his pocket watch, then gave a signal to his men. They would move in quietly, try to take as many of the rustlers by surprise as possible. "Stay behind me," Samuel reminded Cassidy one last time. They moved toward the entrance, keeping to the shadows. The narrow passage muffled their footsteps as they slipped into the canyon. Inside, the scene was much as they had observed earlier, but with more men and cattle. Reed's full operation was now assembled, preparing to move out. Samuel signaled for his men to spread out, using the rocks and trees for cover as they advanced toward the rustlers' camp. Cassidy stayed close behind him, her rifle ready. She could see Reed by the main fire, issuing orders to his men as they prepared the cattle for the drive. They had almost reached effective firing position when disaster struck. One of the townsmen, a shopkeeper unused to stealth operations, stepped on a dry branch. The crack echoed through the canyon like a gunshot. Reed's head snapped up. "Who's there?" he shouted, drawing his pistol. "Now." Samuel yelled, abandoning stealth. "U.S. Marshal, drop your weapons," chaos erupted. Reed's men scrambled for their guns as Samuel's posse opened fire from their positions. At the same moment, Edmund's group appeared at the far end of the canyon, cutting off the rustlers' escape route. Cassidy took cover behind a large rock, firing at her rustler who was aiming at one of the townsmen. Her shot found its mark, the man dropping his weapon and clutching his shoulder. Around her, the night had become a storm of gunfire and shouting. Samuel moved with the confidence of a man who had faced danger before, directing his men while steadily advancing toward Reed. The rustler leader had taken cover behind an overturned wagon, firing methodically at anyone who came too close. "Give it up, Reed," Samuel called. "You're surrounded." "Go to hell, lawman," Reed shouted back, punctuating his defiance with another shot. Cassidy kept her position, providing covering fire for Samuel and the others. She saw her father's group advancing from the other direction, squeezing the rustlers into an increasingly tight space. Several of Reed's men, seeing the hopelessness of their situation, threw down their weapons and surrendered. Others fought on desperately, creating a protective circle around their leader. The cattle, panicked by the gunfire, were stamping and lowing, adding to the confusion. Cassidy watched as Samuel directed two of the ranch hands to begin moving the herd to one side of the canyon, away from the fighting. The battle was turning in their favor when Cassidy noticed a rustler creeping along the canyon wall, working his way behind Samuel. From his position, Samuel couldn't see the threat. Without hesitation, Cassidy left her cover, moving to get a clear shot at the flanking rustler. "Samuel, behind you," she shouted, raising her rifle. Samuel turned just as the rustler fired. The bullet grazed Samuel's arm, tearing his sleeve and drawing blood. Before the man could fire again, Cassidy's shot caught him in the leg, dropping him to the ground. In that moment of distraction, Reed made his move. Breaking from cover, he raced toward the horses, clearly intending to escape in the confusion. Cassidy was the closest to his path. "Cassidy, stay down," Samuel yelled, seeing Reed running in her direction, but Cassidy had already moved to intercept the rustler leader. She stepped into his path, rifle raised. "Stop right there, Reed." Reed skidded to a halt, his eyes wild with desperation. For a fraction of a second, Cassidy thought he might surrender. Then his hand moved to his belt, drawing a hidden derringer. Time seemed to slow. Cassidy saw the small gun rising toward her, knew she wouldn't be able to fire her rifle quickly enough. From the corner of her eye, she saw Samuel running toward them, his face a mask of terror. The crack of a rifle shot echoed through the canyon. Reed jerked backward, the derringer falling from his hand unfired. He crumpled to the ground, a look of surprise frozen on his face. Cassidy turned to see her father lowering his rifle, his expression grim but resolved. "Nobody threatens my daughter," he said simply. With Reed down, the fight went out of the remaining rustlers. Within minutes, all had surrendered, many dropping their weapons before being ordered to do so. Samuel reached Cassidy, his face pale beneath the grime of battle. "Are you all right?" he demanded, his hands checking her for injuries even as he asked. "I'm fine," she assured him. "You're the one who's bleeding." He glanced at his arm as if noticing the wound for the first time. "It's nothing, a scratch." His attention shifted to Edmund, who had joined them. "That was some shot, Mr. Lawson." Edmund nodded grimly. "No one threatens my family." He looked around at the captured rustlers. "What now, Sheriff? Now we round them up, tend to the wounded, and take them all back to town to face justice," Samuel said. "Reed was wanted in 3 territories. The rest will stand trial here." The aftermath of the battle was organized chaos. The wounded, both from their own group and among the rustlers, were treated as best they could manage in the field. The dead, including Reed and 2 of his most loyal men, were wrapped in blankets for transport back to town. The captured rustlers were bound and placed under guard. Throughout it all, Samuel kept Cassidy in his sight, as if afraid she might vanish if he looked away too long. When the immediate tasks were handled, he found her helping Rosa, who had arrived with a wagon to bring supplies and assist with the wounded. "You shouldn't have left cover," he said quietly, drawing her aside. "That man would have shot you in the back," she replied, her chin lifting defiantly. "And Reed nearly shot you." His voice shook slightly at the memory, but he didn't. Pa made sure of that. She reached up to touch his face gently. "We're both still here, that's what matters." Samuel captured her hand, pressing a kiss to her palm. "I've never been so scared in my life as when I saw Reed pointing that gun at you. Now you know how I felt when I saw that man sneaking up behind you," she countered. A throat cleared nearby, and they turned to find Edmund watching them. Samuel straightened, releasing Cassidy's hand, but her father just smiled tiredly. "When we get these rustlers locked up and the cattle sorted out," Edmund said, "I believe you wanted to have a conversation with me, Sheriff." Samuel's eyes widened slightly, but he nodded. "Yes, sir, I do." "Good," Edmund said, "because I'd like my daughter to be courted by a man worthy of her. I believe you might qualify." With that, he walked away, leaving them both speechless. Dawn was breaking by the time they had everything organized. The wounded were loaded into wagons, the prisoners secured for the journey to town, and the recovered cattle gathered for the drive back to their respective ranches. Cassidy rode beside Samuel as they led the procession out of the canyon, her father on her other side. "I've been thinking," Samuel said as they emerged into the pink light of early morning. "About what?" Cassidy asked. "About hats." He removed his Stetson and placed it gently on her head, much as he had that first day in the park, and about how some things are meant to be from the very beginning. Cassidy adjusted the hat, smiling up at him from beneath its brim. "Like a sheriff and a rancher's daughter." "Exactly like that," he agreed, his eyes warm with promise. "Exactly like that." The procession moved slowly across the landscape, heading toward town and justice, but also toward a future neither Cassidy nor Samuel could have imagined when she'd impulsively stolen his hat just days before. The morning sun touched the brim of the Stetson that now sat on Cassidy's head, not stolen this time. but given freely, along with the heart of the man who'd placed it there. 3 months later, on a crisp autumn day, the residents of Cottonwood Springs gathered in the town's small church. The building was decorated with wildflowers and ribbons, the pews filled with townspeople and ranchers alike. At the front stood Samuel Kane, more nervous than he'd ever been facing down outlaws, his best black suit brushed to perfection. When the music began and the doors opened, revealing Cassidy on her father's arm, Samuel forgot to breathe. She wore a simple white dress with lace at the collar and cuffs, her blonde hair arranged in loose curls beneath a delicate veil. But what made him smile was what sat atop the veil, his tan Stetson, the same one she'd stolen that fateful day. As Edmund placed his daughter's hand in Samuel's, he whispered, "Take care of my girl, Sheriff." "With my life," Samuel promised. The ceremony was brief but heartfelt. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Samuel carefully removed his hat from Cassidy's head before lifting her veil and kissing her to the cheers of everyone present. At the reception held at the Lawson Ranch, the newly married couple moved among their guests, accepting congratulations and well wishes. When they finally had a moment alone, Samuel took his wife's hands in his. "Happy, Mrs. Kane?" he asked. Cassidy's smile was radiant. "Happier than I ever thought possible, though I do have one complaint." Samuel raised an eyebrow. "Already, we've only been married 2 hours. You took your hat back," she said with mock seriousness. "I thought it was mine now." Samuel laughed, retrieving the Stetson from where it rested on a nearby table. He placed it on her head, adjusting it just so. "It's always been yours," he said softly, "just like I have." "Since the day I stole it," she agreed. "Since before that," he corrected. "I just needed you to steal my hat to give me the courage to tell you." As the celebration continued around them, Samuel and Cassidy stood together, his hat on her head, her hand in his, a symbol of how a moment of mischief had led to a lifetime of love. From stolen hat to wedding day, their story had only just begun. 5 years later, Samuel Kane stood on the porch of their home, watching as Cassidy taught their 4-year-old son, Edmund, how to ride his first pony. The boy sat proudly in the small saddle, his mother's hand steady on his back as the gentle pony walked in a circle around the yard. Nearby, their 2-year-old daughter, Mary, named for Cassidy's mother, played in the dirt with a collection of wooden blocks Samuel had carved for her. Life had changed dramatically since that day Cassidy had stolen his hat. Samuel had continued as sheriff for 2 more years before accepting an appointment as a territorial judge, ironically following in his father's footsteps after all. The position allowed him more time at home with his growing family while still serving the community. Cassidy had proven to be not just a loving wife and mother, but a talented rancher as well. When her father retired to a smaller house on the property, she had taken over much of the day-to-day management of the Lawson Ranch, implementing new breeding programs that had made their cattle sought after throughout the territory. Together, they had built a life filled with love, respect, and occasional adventure. The rustler incident had become a story told and retold at gatherings, growing slightly more dramatic with each telling. As Samuel watched his family, he fingered the worn brim of the Stetson he still wore, not the same one Cassidy had stolen, which now hung in a place of honor in their home, but a newer version she had given him on their first anniversary. "Careful, Edmund," he called as the boy urged his pony to move faster. "He's fine," Cassidy assured him with a laugh. "He rides like his father." "Heaven help us," Samuel replied, but he was smiling. When the riding lesson was complete, Cassidy lifted Edmund from the saddle and set him on the ground. The boy immediately ran to his father, excitement shining in his eyes. "Did you see me, Pa? I'm a real cowboy now." Samuel scooped him up, settling him on his hip. "The finest cowboy in the territory," he agreed. Cassidy joined them on the porch, picking up Mary along the way. The little girl reached for Samuel's hat, a familiar gesture that never failed to make him smile. "Like mother, like daughter," he said, as Mary's small fingers closed around the brim. Cassidy leaned against him, their children between them. "Best thing I ever stole," she murmured. Samuel turned his head to kiss her, a gesture as natural as breathing after 5 years of marriage. "Best thing I ever got back," he corrected. though I seem to recall putting it on your head and calling you mine. And I've been yours ever since," she finished. As the sun set over their land, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and pink, the Kane family stood together on their porch, a testament to how one impulsive act could change the course of lives forever. The hat that had started their journey hung on the wall inside, a simple memento of a love that had grown from mischief into something enduring and true. In the years that followed, their family would grow further, their ranch would prosper, and their love would deepen. There would be challenges and triumphs, laughter and tears, but through it all, they would face life together, the sheriff who had captured a thief, and the girl who had stolen not just his hat, but his heart. And sometimes, on special occasions or when the mood struck her, Cassidy would take down that old Stetson, place it on her head, and remind her husband of the day she became his. And Samuel, no matter how many years passed, would always look at her the way he had that first day, with wonder, love, and gratitude for the twist of fate that had brought them together. For in the wild and untamed Arizona territory, where life could be harsh and unpredictable, they had found in each other a home, a haven, and a love story that would be told for generations to come, all because a spirited young woman had once stolen a cowboy's hat, and that cowboy had placed it back on her head and called her his.